How's everybody doing today? In a previous video we looked at how to just get multiple forms in one project and move around between the two forms. So this video is kind of an extension of that, which involves sharing data across forms. In this particular project, which is available to you on download, it's called Multiple Forms Shared Data. I have three forms. I've got test 1, I've got test 2, and I've got test average. Now the idea is that a student could put their name in, take the first test, calculate their score, go to the test 2 form. They could take a second test, calculate their calculate their score, and then go to the average form. And if they click the button on the average form, it will pull their name from form 1 or test 1 form, and it will utilize the two variables in test 1 and test 2, the test score variables, to calculate an average. So again, this is sharing data across forms. If I go ahead and run this thing, it's going to come up. I just wanted to show you how it works. And I'm going to put in the information. So I put in the information, I hit calculate score, and it gives me a 75. I got one of them wrong. Actually, it was this one I got wrong, so it gave me a 75. So I can go to test 2, and I can say, well, I'm going to take this test. I'll put in that data. So I put in that data, I calculate the score. So I got 100 on this test. So test 1, I got a 75. Test 2, I got 100. I'm going to say go to the average form, and I click this button which says calculate average of test 1 and test 2. It brings over my name and it actually calculates my average. What I wanted to do now is just take a look at the code, like how are we actually doing this. So I'm going to go into the code. If you want to be able to share a variable across forms, what you have to do, instead of just declaring it as we used to, int test score 1, what I had to do is add a couple other keywords. I added public static int test score 1. What that does is it makes this variable public, so now I can share it across variables. The other thing I did, since I wanted to share the value of my text box across variables, I also made another static variable. In this case, it was a string variable, and I called that student name. Everything else is pretty much the same. I initialized test score 1. I've got some if statements here to look at my text boxes, and if I gave them the right answer, it adds 25 to test score 1. I've only got 4 questions, so they're each worth 25 each. I take that test score 1, I put it into my text box, and then I take the value of the name text box and I put it into the public static variable that I created called student name. My go-to button just creates an instance of form 2 and it opens that. So if I look at form 2, that's going to look very similar to us from what I did in form 1. I had to, since I also need to share my test 2 score, I had to create that as a public static integer variable. I did the same thing with if statements to determine whether they got the right answer, and I took test score variable and I put it into this text box. Now when I get to my average form, how did I bring these over? Well, I defined a variable called test average, okay? But what I wanted to do, the test average is equal to test score 1 plus test score 2 divided by 2, but I can't just ask for test score 1. Since it's not in this form, it's not going to find it. So what I had to do is I had to reference the form that it was in. So I had to say test1 dot test score, test 1 score, plus test 2, the form that I got test 2 score out of, dot test score divided by 2. If I do all that, it's fine. Okay. So then I took my average, my test average that I calculated, threw it into my text box. The other thing I did is I wanted to take that value out of the text box, my student name variable, from form 1, from test 1 form that I threw into the text box there, and utilize it in my text box. So I've got txtname.text, that's my text box in my average form, equals, again I went back to test 1 and pull over this form. So we've successfully been able to share a variable between forms, and we've also successfully been able to share a text box value between forms. So hopefully this sheds some light on that whole process. Hopefully it was helpful. We'll see you next time.